Authorities are not always forthcoming about how many Canadians have traveled overseas to join terrorist groups. And of those Canadians, how many have returned home, in part because those numbers are constantly changing. But last October, we were given some official statistics. And back then, authorities were aware of approximately 130 people who had left the country and another 80 who had since returned. Those numbers, again, they fluctuate all the time. We do also know of some specific cases of Canadians traveling abroad. For instance, 6 Quebecers recently disappeared and are suspected of having gone to join the Islamic State. So yesterday, it was announced that Ottawa would streamline the process by which passports for would-be terrorists are revoked. The new laws would allow the Public Safety Minister, Stephen Blaney, to cancel, refuse, and revoke Canadian passports speedily for national security and terrorism purposes. Additionally, people who have their passports canceled or revoked could have to wait up to 10 years before applying for another. Now, we've had this debate in Canada before about revoking passports for radicals looking to go overseas and fight. And many say we should just let them go overseas and die. I cautioned against this approach because there is no guarantee those radicals would be killed. Additionally, the government cannot guarantee they won't return. And so in my opinion, there are 3 major reasons why the government's latest move to streamline this process, to speed up this process, is the right one. First, when Canadians travel abroad, they leave as untrained terrorists. When they travel overseas, not only do they learn the skills of a highly trained terrorist, but they become more radicalized. They learn how to build and plant IEDs, for instance. They learn how to chop people's heads off. They learn how to intimidate and control population bases. They learn the true meaning of jihad. Second, we cannot guarantee they won't return. So now you have this highly trained terrorist that, if he or she is a Canadian passport holder, has to be let back in the country. Border agents cannot reject that individual. They cannot abandon that terrorist, which is to say a terrorist is entitled to return provided he or she holds a Canadian passport. Now, authorities could at that point arrest that person. But the concern is that it's very difficult for authorities to build a case against someone who's disappeared and is presumed to have traveled overseas. Just think about how they would gather evidence and about the availability of that evidence. It's very hard to prove. And by the way, there are plenty of examples of jihadists returning home to commit terror. Consider the Kouachi brothers. These 2 guys were trained by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and they returned back to Paris to commit the atrocious attack on Charlie Hebdo. Third, I'd argue, we have an international responsibility to prevent the exportation of terrorism. If the government has reason to believe an individual is traveling overseas to commit a crime, it should stop them. Canada has a moral responsibility to not destabilize other regions by dumping our garbage abroad. Now, I'll conclude with this. People seem to think that a passport belongs to them. That's not true. A passport belongs to the government of Canada, and it was given to you as a privilege. It can also be revoked if need be.